Welcome to week 2 of 207X. I hope you've been enjoying this week's content regarding ape and human variation, variation in behavior, variation in morphology. I'll be talking more about that in a second, but I first want to apologize. I discovered last night that all of the updates I'd made to content in week 1 and 2, updates from the first iteration of the course to this one, actually weren't visible to you. I could see them, but you couldn't. That problem has been corrected, and the good news is that none of those changes are related to the assessments, so your grades should be fine. However, if you have the time, you should go back and review content from week 1 and 2, as there's additional background content that I've added. In addition, in some cases, I've added information to the explanation associated with problems to add more context and more information for you to better understand the concepts that were discussed. Again, I apologize for that, and it shouldn't be a problem going forward. Regarding apes and thinking about primates as a comparative perspective, one of the challenges in asking evolutionary questions is forming a proper comparative perspective, coming up with that null hypothesis, the basic set of expectations. Our discipline is fundamentally comparative. We understand fossil variation by comparing it to known patterns of variation that we see in the world around us. And our non-human primate cousins are our closest living relatives for those kinds of questions. Throughout the history of understanding human evolution, primates have appeared as sort of particular models for how we think about human evolution. So in the 1970s, for example, Clifford Jollig and colleagues presented a very influential model looking at baboons as a model for human evolution. Baboons being highly social and also occupying more open savanna environments, two important elements thought to be critical in human evolution. More recently, the notion of chimpanzees as at least a morphological model for human evolution has been predominant, though there's at least one strong argument, which we'll get to in 2 weeks, arguing against that notion of chimpanzees. One of the limitations we have, especially if we're looking at apes, is that these days there aren't actually that many apes on the planet, a topic that we'll get to again beginning in 2 weeks. So the number of comparative perspectives that apes afford us, the number of different comparative models about reproductive strategies, feeding strategies, body morphology and development are somewhat limited. And as we'll see when we get into asking questions about the fossil record, that becomes a little bit of a challenge. That said, next week, starting tomorrow, we'll have new content that will finally take us into the fossil record. This content will provide an introduction to how we begin to ask questions and understand evidence derived from the fossil record. This will segue into week 4 when we finally move out of the background material and actually start looking at the hominin fossil record, looking at the fossil evidence for where we've come from, how we've evolved, and what are the major moments in our evolutionary past.